So, how did you get to native wind? And could you describe what native wind is for a person who has no clue what it is?
Yeah. Native Wind is Tailwind for React Native. It is a glorified wrapper around the Tailwind CLI. And Tailwind, in case anyone is unclear, is not unlike Bootstrap from back in the day in the sense of these sort of shortened descriptors for CSS. And you can use them to vastly simplify styling in React. And so we saw that, or I guess Mark really saw that simplicity and wanted to bring it to React Native. And there's a lot of nuance. So you have to make something that, especially with React Native going more web now as well, you have to make it work for just base web and then also for native styling, which does not work like the web. So that's what Native Wind is. The way that I got involved with Native Wind is I was spending some time working on Tamagui last year. I've lost all track of time at this point, by the way. I have no idea what's going on or when I worked somewhere else. But I spent a little bit of time working on Tamagui. And while that didn't work out, soon after ended up at App.js in May of this year. And I was excited because I had been talking to Mark Lawler over voice chat and Discord a lot, and I got to meet him in person for the first time. And here we are at there's this like mezzanine to set the scene, and it's overlooking the stage. And I see him sitting there, and he is a giant person, by the way. He is a mountain of a human being. And I see him sitting in one of these lounge chairs that they have set up, and I'm like, this is it. Go talk to him. Go say hi. And Native Wind, just to set the scene here, is the last major update was 2 years ago with version 2.0. Version 4 had been announced in January of this year, I think, but had really seen no development until then. So there's this giant question mark around what's going on with it. And Mark had recently joined Expo, and no one knew, does that mean Native Wind's going to go to Expo or what's going on? So I go and sit down next to him. I have a photo from this actually, but I look at him and I'm like, hey, Mark, so you might, do you need any help with Native Wind? Because I'd be happy to help out getting it across the finish line. Fully expecting him to be like, no, I'm good. Like, I'll get it out. It'll be ready when it's ready. But he actually responded. He was like, no, I reckon I might. And that was the beginning of this sort of this journey. I think I formally stepped in like August, and then it took up until October when it actually launched. Version 4, that is. Overwhelmingly, that work is Mark. I might only take credit for just like being a forcing function kind of thing. Yeah. But even after launch, it has still like that feeling doesn't go away of that urgency, that like gap that you feel leading up to the launch. Post launch, it doesn't go away. It's still there. And I still feel it. Yeah. So that was Native Wind version 4.
That's awesome. And kudos for getting involved and helping push that along. I know there's a lot of times when you would hear somebody like with a bunch of enthusiasm come up to a maintainer, oh, let me help you. And you're like, yes, please. And then they like disappear. You're like, what happened? So kudos for pushing that over the line. This is while you're talking, I was thinking back in the day, I had gotten involved in Phone Gap in Cordova way, way back in the day, building native apps with web, not native at all. I remember there was some attempts to make CSS libraries that like felt native. Because the big thing at the time then, which I remember hearing a lot, is people are not going to trust an app that doesn't look like a native app. I remember hearing that in those times. No, it has to look like the native interfaces or whatever. And I was briefly looking, I couldn't find any of the old style libraries or whatever that I seen at the time. But it's interesting that it seems as an industry, I'm sure that is still around, that feeling of, oh, this needs to feel native, even in React Native. But by and large, like a lot of companies moved away from that. Oh, we're not trying to use like Apple's like human design. Let's like lean into it a little bit, but do our custom branding or whatever. Do you feel like that's changing? Or are you trying to change it? What's the story there?
I think I struggle with this a lot actually. So we I like to think of it as there's two cohorts of people, and I'll actually run polls for this, and the results always surprise me, but there's two cohorts of people. There's the people who want to build what I call cross-platform applications. And then there's the people who want to build multi-platform applications. And the difference there for me is that cross-platform is let's make it run everywhere, and multi-platform is let's make it feel native everywhere. And I think that a lot of the early hype about React Native was the former, and we're only now coming around to the latter for a multitude of different reasons. But what I find when I poll folks in our community is that it's actually evenly split down the middle, and that's jarring. And so I think it's really important to provide the options for people to do what they feel is the priority. For me, that native feel that you're referring to is super important because design, that visual aesthetic, is the way that you establish trust with strangers on the internet, right? You're not meeting people, you're not doing sales in person anymore. You have basically one opportunity when you show them something to establish that trust, and it'll go a pretty long way. The next chance you get is every time they use your product. And you want to try to make sure that that also is as pleasant. But for a lot of people, your banks, your healthcare apps, it doesn't matter really. And it's important that they have the tooling to make things cross-platform or whatever. And this is why I don't see things as one tool versus another. I think we all have a role to play in that process. Yeah. And then you can just focus on your zone, right? Your fraction of the pie. As we serve these people, and by not trying to do more than that, we're going to be the best within this sub.
So would you say
You know
native
what I mean?
wind is in that second category where you like lean more into the native feel, or is it the opposite where you lean more into the universal
Yeah.
feel?
Native Wind started before my time. Native Wind started as an attempt to be a unified styling system. So quite a bit more than it is now. And part of the version 4 idea was to move away from that and just be this unopinionated, so to speak, styling option. And so I think that Native Wind, as best it can, is going to try to be not opinionated about whether you want to do cross-platform or multi-platform. And so you end up seeing component libraries then spawn out React Native reusables, glue stack, right? Ones that favor more of that generic look, that shad cn look or whatever, right? That base configuration, while simultaneously allowing for something like Native Wind UI or any other library that focuses on a native look and feel. It's more, you think more of it as a foundation on the basis, like your only assumption for people who are going to use Native Wind is these people like the interface of Tailwind. They don't want to entertain something different. Ideally, they're even coming from web into native, and we're just giving that to them. If you don't like, that's fine. You should try something else. Tamagui is another great option for that. I don't think it has an opinion, Native Wind, on cross-platform